Hi friends, thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach podcast. I am Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Hi friends, welcome back to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm excited to introduce you today to my friend Nate Benson. Nathan graduated with his Bachelor's of Science in Neuroscience from Brigham Young University. He is a certified brain injury specialist through the Brain Injury Association of America and is also a certified phlebotomist. He works at Cognitive FX and spends most of his time as a patient care coordinator conducting sensory motor therapies for people with acquired brain injuries, such as concussions, stroke, long-haul COVID, etc. Nate is a proud husband and father of 2 children. He served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Phoenix, Arizona, and is fluent in Spanish and enjoys learning Dutch. He is currently applying to PA school and hopes to focus his studies on neurology or orthopedics. Nate and I first met when he was a patient at Cognitive FX, and I got to be one of the occupational therapists who worked with him during his treatment. And from that very first hour-long visit, I knew he was awesome, and so I was thrilled when he ended up working at CFX, and we've been able to maintain our friendship over the years. I will let him tell you more about himself, but I'm excited to hear more about his story and to have him share his insights and knowledge with us. So thank you for being here today, Nate.
Thank you, Bethany. I'm really excited to be part of this.
So tell us a little bit, more about yourself. Where are you from? What is your story?
So I call home Bountiful, Utah. So North Salt Lake area. Been in Utah most of my life, except for instances like serving on my mission. I have been married for about 5 years, and my wife and I, we have 2 awesome kiddos that keep us busy. Part of that, I also like to get outside when we can. We go skiing during the winter and then water skiing in the summer. So we're always on some form of skis or just at least getting outside when we can. But most of our life revolves around school, work, and taking care of those 2 little guys.
Awesome. So tell us about your injury. How long ago did it happen and what happened?
So this will take you back about 20 years. It's weird to think that it was that long ago now. But what was happening is that right around when I was 6 years old, for the next 2 or 3 years, our family was actually exposed to carbon monoxide from a leaky furnace in our house. So unlike most stories of carbon monoxide, where it's just like this one big dramatic event that happens within a few hours where somebody passes out or like they nearly die, ours was more of that chronic, prolonged exposure. And it took a few months before my mom was starting to kind of piece things together that we're acting all moody, we were sleeping in. And mind you, we were kids that were super energetic and really happy all the time, but we were even like falling behind in school. And it just, everything was really difficult for us. And for me, I was a morning person. I would wake up at like 6 o'clock, and I was like an elementary school kid. So I was always a morning person, and I was starting to sleep in a lot. So just something wasn't adding up. And over time, my mom was able to finally identify that it could be symptoms of carbon monoxide, which for her to figure that out was pretty remarkable, because back then, internet wasn't as big of a thing. Like, you don't have this wealth of information to dig up, right? So we had somebody come and check the house. They didn't find anything. We're like, what? Okay, I guess it's not that. But then I had a piano recital a couple weeks later, and it was like in the middle of the day. And it took my duet partner calling us to say, hey, are you guys coming to it? We hadn't woken up yet. And so there was that moment where we could have just kept sleeping, but that phone call was able to get us out of the house. And we called and they said, hey, if you hadn't caught this in the next few days, you could have died.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And it is amazing that your mom knew what was going on or figured out what was going on.
Yeah. She is a nurse by trade. So she learned to pay attention to the symptoms and through her own homework, she was able to put 2 and 2 together that something was up.
And they didn't find it when they came and actually looked for it the first time?
Yeah, the first time they didn't find it. It could have been to us simply like we had aired out the house or something like that, but just the first time they didn't find it.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And we didn't have the carbon monoxide detectors, or if we did, they weren't working.
Yeah. Oh
So
man.
make sure that those, if you have them, or if you have any like furnace or a stove, anything that burns gas, make sure you have carbon monoxide detectors that are up to date, and make sure you test them like every 6 months to a year. I believe you can get them on Amazon for like $20 and they last for like 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Holy cow. I assume the furnace was like in the basement or something. Was it just going
Yeah.
throughout the whole house? And
Yeah. Whole house. And my brother and I, we were the room right next to the furnace. So we got the most of it.
okay. How old was your brother?
So he's 15 months younger than me. So he was like 5 and I was 6. And again, it went for a couple years before we were able to figure out what was going on.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So you guys found, and when they came, I assume they came another time after you guys slept in that day and checked again. Is that what happened?
Yeah, we called them back in and said, hey, something's definitely off. You need to come check this again. And then they found it the next time. And then we immediately got the furnace replaced.
So before I met you at CFX, I didn't even know that carbon monoxide poisoning could give brain injury type things. Like what was that experience like for you?
So, I mean, I was a little kid, so I wasn't like super aware of everything that was going on. But just a little bit of an explanation of why carbon monoxide can produce a brain injury. I mean, people are like, what the heck? Like, I know people die, but how does this lead to a brain injury? So, what goes on with carbon monoxide is that it actually binds to your hemoglobin, and that's the molecule in your red blood cells that carries oxygen, right? And what it does is that it kicks out the oxygen and it just binds to your red blood cells and it won't let go. And so you're actually slowly getting starved of oxygen. And so it's what's called a hypoxic brain injury, is that it's almost like you're just holding your breath or you're not breathing as much and your brain slowly over time is just dealing with less and less oxygen. And with symptoms like that, I mean, you can find them all over the internet of people doing like the air fighter pilot test where they like take the oxygen out of the room. And so like you see all these people, it's like they're in laughing gas. They like stop, they can't think as clearly. They forget to even put their mask back on. Ours wasn't that extreme, but it's just like we got way more emotional. We were tired all the time. We didn't have the energy to engage in things. It's just like it's like a damper got put on everything.
Okay, so this is really interesting. So with the hypoxic brain injury, it's probably like profuse. Is that the word I want to say? Like
Yeah.
it's the entire brain. It's not just like one area that's been affected, right?
Yeah, it's a global effect to your brain.
Man. And both you and your brother experienced that. And I guess the rest of your
The whole
family.
family did. Yeah. And my dad, he was actually working a lot as a lawyer, and so he wasn't in the house as much. But we found out after we moved out of the house, there's an oil leak in his car, and he was getting carbon monoxide from the oil burning on the engine and going through his ventilation system.
Man,
Yeah, so it was just like
had to have it apparently.
yeah, carbon monoxide all around, and so like that went on, and then we were able to, I mean, get out of the house, and fortunately, we were a very active family. We were doing a lot. And so like getting out of the house, moving, being active, I found that I was able to bounce back for a considerable amount. But things like, for example, school, it took a lot more work to be able to get through school. And so like I'd be able to sit there in the class and I'd have to focus really hard and I could eventually do the homework like the rest of my classmates, but I was just so much slower. And when you're working your brain so hard all the time, it turns into this emotional toll too of like, am I not as smart? Or this is just taking so much work. I want to go out and play. I mean, as a kid, you don't want to be doing homework, right? But I believe that like being so active, like I played soccer and football a lot growing up, and I might have bumped my head a few times from that, getting like mild concussions and things. But it was in high school when I found that when I was having to do school for a lot more of the day and even like doing a lot like hours of homework after school, I was even taking AP classes my junior and senior year. And I found out I was actually getting physically sick from studying too much.
Mm.
Like there was this one time my senior year during Thanksgiving break, I can still remember it vividly. I took the ACT, getting ready for college, and I was taking like 4 AP classes that semester, and I felt like my brain just literally was like fried. Like somebody had poured chemical into my brain, and I just couldn't think or talk hardly at all. I was so tired. I was literally on the couch for like 2 weeks.
Seriously, 2 weeks.
Yeah, it
Wow.
was bad. And eventually I kind of recuperated enough and I got through the year, but like I would on my B days when I had 3 AP classes, I would like get to my physics class at the end of the day, and it was only my third class of the day, and I would sleep through most of the class.
Oh my gosh.
I have no idea how I passed that class.
That's amazing. So did you recognize that all of these things were due to the brain injury with like did you know it was still related?
So actually I had no idea. I just thought I was tired. I thought I was worn out. And like there were a lot of other things I was still able to do. Again, it just came at a high energy cost. When you're trying to do a lot, it wore me out very quickly. Whereas my friends, they could do a full day and then still go play or like socialize or like practice music and things like that. And for me, I just couldn't do that. Like my social life tanked a lot my senior year actually, and my mood started going downhill. Even though I still did a lot and socialized, it got to this point where my quality of life was starting to really decline my senior year of high school.
Mm. I'm going to take us back for just a second because a couple of questions. Did you have problems focusing? Like, it sounds like you were focusing so hard, but was it difficult? Did you have like the ADHD kind of symptoms that a lot of times people with?
So there, like some of the symptoms I was feeling, like thinking back on it, I was really tired. Now that I've been working with brain injuries for like 5 years, I understand my eyes weren't working together. I actually had like a pretty nasty bike crash when I was in first grade, right in the middle of all that carbon monoxide stuff. So that probably didn't help. But it was like reading was really hard for me to do. Like I would get headaches or I'd get super tired or I'd get restless from trying to keep up and working so hard. So like my attention, oh yeah, I was like, my mind wandered a lot. I was fidgeting. Like I was one of those kids that was like drumming on the table and things. And my outlet was exercising a lot. And so like my senior year, I think I was exercising on average like 2 to 3 hours a day.
Wow.
Just to like keep myself moving. Otherwise, I would crash
Wow.
emotionally and cognitively.
Did you, sorry, I want to go back because this is, for some reason, I really want to know.
Yeah.
The more the science part of it, the hemoglobin. So when you're not exposed to carbon monoxide anymore, and you're getting oxygen again, like our red blood cells rejuvenate, reproduce themselves. Like you get new ones regularly. And so if you're not continually exposed to it, then you don't have the continued exposure. Like if you're not exposed to it, then it's better, right? Like your brain gets the oxygen again.
Yeah. So like if you find or you're suspect that you're dealing with carbon monoxide, the very first thing is go to the emergency room and tell them that you think you have carbon monoxide. And there's a couple things that they can do. And there's some research that hyperbaric oxygen therapy, so like you go and do that high pressure and just pumping oxygen into your body. There's been some success if you can do that in the first like 24 to 48 hours, I think it was what it was. But there are other things you can do too. But yeah, eventually your body, it's cycling through its blood. It's constantly recycling and producing new red blood cells about every 30 days. So like technically after 30 days, that carbon monoxide could be out of your system if you're no longer exposed to it. And so people do often experience a progress in their symptoms, but when that progress is kind of halts and you're hitting this plateau and you're not getting back to where you were, that's when you know you're dealing with a chronic injury that your brain literally had to modify itself in some way, or there was more serious injury going on and your brain wasn't able to heal from it completely.
That makes sense. So for your family, when you guys figured it out, you got the carbon monoxide stopped in your house. Did people start feeling a little bit better, and like, because your mom noticed all of these symptoms that people were having kind of as a whole, and that's what cued her into it. Did those go away? Or, I mean, you had these lingering things. You said you didn't know that they were still related. How did that play out?
Yeah. So my mom like used to joke that like we were genius kids and now we're smart. So like we could still get along, and I feel like we were like 90% of who we used to be. So like there are some things where like instead of being super energetic and full of life and socializing, we would socialize but maybe not as much. Or emotionally we were a little more sensitive, we could be a little more easily triggered, or like our fuse was shorter, little things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
But
yeah, there was definitely progress, and obviously like I had that bike crash and there's maybe a couple other things, but ultimately there was some progress, but we didn't completely bounce back to where we were.
I see. And you didn't know at the time, like when you were in high school and you were so tired and all those things, you didn't recognize that it was a brain injury.
No, not really. My mom was suspect that there could have been something, and she like got a structural MRI, and they're like, oh, the little ciliary fibers, some like there was like a little bit of like shrinking or something, but the structural didn't actually show anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're like, okay, maybe it's not a brain injury. I mean, brain injury was such a new thing 20 years ago. I mean, it's still new now,
What do you
but
mean by that? I
it
mean,
was
people have
hard
had
to
brain
know if
injuries
it was the
forever.
brain itself versus like just I don't, yeah, it was still new to us and we were trying to put the pieces together. It could have been brain injury, but we weren't sure.
Uh-huh. Okay. So then how did you, I don't know if that's going to make you skip forward too far. What happened after high school? Or like, how did you end up finding the help that you got at CFX?
So after high school, I actually served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints down in Phoenix, Arizona. And I did that for 2 years. And
You learned a new language for that too,
I had
right?
to learn a new language during that time. Yeah. And it's already stressful. And those aren't familiar. It's for male missionaries, it's 24 months. And you're working like anywhere from like 10 to 15 hours a day. And when you're learning a new language, you have to also be able to learn to communicate with people in a language you've never done before. And you're sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ, but then you're also like working with the community. You're working with this other person that is called your companion. And so you deal with like the drama of having to live with somebody you don't know hardly at all, and trying to plan out your day and interact with new people. And so there's a lot of stress you go through. And there's a lot of like really great moments, but for me it was a lot on my brain trying to keep up with learning the new language on top of all the scheduling and the constant moving we were doing every day. And I actually was developing a lot of symptoms of like pretty bad anxiety and depression, and I had that for at least 75% of my mission, and I pushed through because I didn't fully understand what I was dealing with. And it was when I got home, I started my first year of college, and the same thing happened like in high school, where I did my first semester, I made it through, but then I got sick for 3 weeks. That same brain fried chemical like feeling, like I was bedridden for like 2.5 weeks or almost 3. And then that carried over into the next semester where I just was scraping by. And after that first year of college, I could only read like half a page of a book, and I'd have to sleep for 30 minutes. Or I could have like a short conversation with somebody and then I was out for the whole day. Like I almost turned into a hermit, so to speak, where I could barely do anything.
Holy cow.
And it was during this time my mom was like, okay, we need to figure out something. And my neighbor, they had a daughter who actually nearly died after falling off a 30-foot retention wall. And she miraculously survived that and was able to go through some surgeries and things. And then she went through this clinic called Cognitive Effects. And a lot of her symptoms were resolved to the point where if you didn't know her before, you had no idea she had even had a near death experience.
Wow.
And we're like, maybe we should try that for Nate and see if that would help him too. We didn't think that I had whacked my head too hard or anything, but maybe it could be something that would help me.
So were you guys the first ones to come through with carbon monoxide poisoning? Do you know?
Yeah, so my family sent me through as the guinea pig, and we went into that report of findings with Dr. Lena Fong, and she's like, well, your functional MRI, it looks like there's something going on with your brain that's not right. And so what if if you guys want to give this a try, let's do the treatment and see how your brain will respond. Because it looks like there's some blood flow areas that are not lining up like a healthy person. And our therapy is shown to re-regulate blood flow, and that could help you feel a lot better.
That's amazing. So you tried it.
So we tried it. Yeah. And needless to say, a little brief insight into what happened is I went through that week. I discovered all these things I was terrible at that I had no idea. Like, I thought I was somebody that was just very simple with my vocabulary, and I hated English class and I didn't know why. And I like poetry and things, but just like the reading and all the stuff there was just so hard for me to process. And then on my scan, it showed all my language centers were hardly turning on. I was like, oh, okay, that could explain it. And then when I went through treatment, we worked on a lot of those skills over and over. And by the end of the week, I felt like these clouds had been lifted from my mind and I felt sharp. My reaction time was faster. I mean, my sister was driving me each day to and from therapy. And at the beginning of the week, being the passenger in the car, my foot would naturally brake at the same time as she would. But by the end of the week, I was like jumping out of my seat because I was reacting well before she was, because my reaction time had improved significantly. My brain could process information faster. But then it actually took more like 6 months before my ability to articulate and speak actually started blossoming, and I was able to communicate a lot better. I wasn't stuttering as much. I didn't say the ums and the ands and draw things out as much. And just over the years, it's been progressively getting a little better.
I love that. That's so cool. And apparently you didn't really trust your sister's driving skills, but
I mean, I'm the guy that likes to drive. I've gotten a lot better as a passenger with being married. I've had to trust my wife a lot more and learn to chill out a little bit.
That's so funny. So other than CFX, was there anything that you guys had, like therapies or things that you had tried prior to doing this clinic for your head injury?
My mom tried out a lot of things for herself because she was dealing with some of these symptoms too, but CFX was the first one where I was actually given a chance to try and work on some of these things. And I mean, it was a one-way ticket to feeling better. So fortunately, I only had to go to one place.
Yeah, that's so good. Yes, and the fact that you work there now, I think, is a testament not only to how effective it was and how well it worked, but also to how much you enjoyed it and progress you saw.
Yeah, working with people like you, Bethany, was a big game changer. I just felt like I was just having fun. I was like meeting all these new friends, playing around the whole time, doing these games that I thought were easy, but I was really bad at. Yeah, being there with the people just as much as the therapy made me want to come back.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know. It's like the best place. I just really love the people who are there working there and the patients who come through. It's the best. You know this.
It's an incredible culture.
Yeah. So tell me, I guess now that you work there, what have you learned about concussions? Or maybe as a patient you learned this, but was there anything that you learned about the effects of head injury that surprised you or that you weren't aware of before experiencing all of this?
I keep getting surprised every day. I've been at this for 5 years and I'm still surprised.
Okay, yeah. So what have you learned? What are some of the surprises?
So, I mean, to start off, they call it concussion, but I would say brain injury is a better way to describe it, to capture more of all the different ways people can get injured. A lot of times people, when they're dealing with these longer term symptoms from a head injury, it's really hard to perceive at first. And so that's why they call it an invisible injury. People can usually fake their way through it. They can start the day well, or they can just hide it and just power through. And a lot of it is something that you don't really discover unless you do a little bit of introspection and you can tie it back to an event, right? So like for some people, there's even a delay in their symptoms after their injury event. But the biggest thing is you need to be able to see a contrast in some way. Like especially if you had this life before your injury and then you know yourself after, being able to see that contrast, usually there's a lot of things that will start to change. Like for example, mood. People are going to feel tired, more irritable, grumpy, not as patient. those are things that people often attribute as, oh, they're just an impatient person, or they're aggressive, or like they're somebody to just not affiliate with, like they're just always this way. I've come to see that in that sense, that could be just an injury of the brain, and it's not who that person is. And so I've actually learned to be a lot more sympathetic and a lot more forgiving for people that sometimes behave really poorly, and come to find that they're struggling with things that they sometimes themselves don't even know about. And
Yeah.
then, so like that's a lot of like that psychological mood, emotion things. But then you delve into more of like the functionality of life. I mean, my eyes still don't work together perfectly. And so, like, being able to read for long periods of time or understand what I'm reading, like, I had no idea that was related to my brain either. And as a student, I hated reading. You have to read so many textbooks. And I was like, oh, man, that's something that can also get better. But I mean, the list just goes on and on and on about like memory and endurance, your mood, and just the brain is so intricately connected with everything you do. And if you feel like you've had some sort of like major injury through like a car crash, or you fall, or not even like passing out, sometimes you need to go and check in with a brain injury specialist and see, hey, is there something going on with my brain that might be impacting how I'm feeling?
Yeah. Yes. Oh, thank you so much for saying all of that, because that is one of the things that I think it's hard to know when our moods are off, or we're, yeah, like you said, getting impatient or more irritable. You don't usually think, oh, this is related to a head injury that I had. It's like, oh, I'm just having a bad day, or I'm annoyed with, like, we tend to attribute all of our emotions to circumstances outside of ourselves. Like, this thing happened, and so of course I'm mad about it, right? But really that's not always the case. So it is surprising sometimes the things that come up from head injuries, and really important, I think, for people to understand that and get the news out there. So thank you for bringing all those up. So what advice, well, actually, first I want to hear what ended up happening with your family. You came through first. You said you're the guinea pig.
Yeah.
Who else came through?
So I was a guinea pig. It helped me a lot. And following that, shortly before I started working there, my mom and brother then went through treatment. And then just about a year ago, so a few years after that, my youngest sister has come through. And we almost got my dad to come through, but his scan looked really good and he's been feeling good. So we're like, okay, I guess he doesn't need it.
It would be so fun to play with him though there. It'd be,
Oh yeah. No, I've shown him around the clinic and things, and he's like, man, I'd be bad at that. I'm like, yeah, we should do this. And he's like, I don't need it. I mean, he's a genius. Like, he's really good at what he does, and I think he'll be okay. But yeah, I mean, that's one thing too, as a therapist, I've realized, I mean, everybody's got stuff. It's just a matter of how much it's interfering with your life and how much it drives you crazy. You need to resolve it on your own, right?
yes, the pain point has to be to a certain place before it's worth it to put all that effort in, for sure.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about what you do there. How are you helping patients as they come through?
So I work as a patient care coordinator. It's kind of an umbrella term to try and capture all the different little things that we do there. The primary role that I like the most is working as a sensory motor therapist. So we're in the trenches as a therapist, helping the patients work through symptoms they're trying to improve or resolve. And so a lot of the therapies we're doing involve different devices to allow you to do multitasking based therapies. And so we often get patients moving and then doing a cognitive task like, okay, name like 5 things that start with the letter B. And people are like, well, I can do it if I don't have to move. And it's like, yeah, but once you move, and then they just fall apart. And it's like, okay, this is highlighting something. There's a dysfunction in your brain, and we can work through that. So as a sensory motor therapist, we're helping patients work through those injuries and those symptoms head on. But then we also do follow-up appointments, and we help make what's called post-care plans, where once the patient finishes their treatment here at CFX, we do a discharge plan where we help them understand how they can do all their homework at home to continue making progress. And we'll even do follow-up to make sure that everything is going okay. We can talk about expectations over recovery, and even how to fine-tune things at home so you can make the most of your treatment.
Yeah, awesome. You said that you felt like better that week, and then you started seeing other changes further down the road, and you're still continuing to see positive things from it. Is that an accurate summary? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I would say the first 6 months after treatment was like the biggest changes that I saw. And then as life progressed, I found that other little things just kept getting better and better. Like my confidence grew, my ability to manage time. I mean, part of it could just be getting older and learning to grow up a little bit, right? Like as a newlywed and in college, you think you know everything, and then life kind of gives you reality check multiple times over, right? But I found that going through treatment gave me that confidence and that mojo to actually take things and try hard things that I normally was terrified to do. And I was fearful of because I knew I was going to have symptoms or I would look like a fool. But going through treatment helped me gain that understanding, but also enough healing to where I was willing to try those things and actually succeed at them.
That's awesome. Did you go into neuroscience as your undergrad major prior to going to CFX?
No, not at all. I was pre-med. I was getting ready to go to medical school, and I was told that microbiology was the best major for it. And I love science. Like that's something that's never changed. But after starting to work at CFX, I'm like, man, the brain is so cool. It's involved in everything. And it ties so closely with like psychology. And I loved psychology too, just like understanding how people think and why they behave the way they do. But then the hard science of being able to see how the physiology influence that too. Like even hormones, like hormones affect your mood so much, right? And then I saw neuroscience and I was talking to one of my coworkers and they had made the switch to neuroscience halfway through their time at BYU. And that's where I was. And I was like, what the heck, let's do this. And so I actually switched to neuroscience just because of my time working at CFX. And I'm so glad that I did.
That's so cool. Yeah, I considered neuroscience as well and then ended up going a different path. But the brain is so fascinating. I love it. So what advice would you give to people who are dealing with concussions, head injuries of whatever kind?
I mean, the fact that you're finding a podcast and you're trying to find those resources, I think is a huge win. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you already know you're in the right arena. You're trying to find answers. I commend you for that. It's often hard to do this on your own. And if you have that support system, if you have somebody there that understands you and is willing to listen to you, that's the first place to go. Find a support person, because dealing with a brain injury all on your own, it's a lot. People often have to do it, which is really sad. But if you do know somebody that will support you, get them on your side and have that support to get through this difficult time. The next thing I would do is find people that are familiar and up to date on brain injury research, right? There are people that, like even neurologists, they're incredible at what they do, but brain injury, at least mild traumatic brain injury, such as a concussion, they're less familiar with. And some people will tell you, go in a dark room until you feel better. And anybody that's done a little bit of research that knows that sitting and doing nothing is the worst thing for your brain. And I would say your mental health. I mean, humans are designed to move, right? Even if it's the minimal, I would recommend still trying to do things with your life. And whatever you can, try to find that help with somebody that knows about brain injury treatment. Cognitive Effects is one of those places that knows that you can find healing, and they have years of experience treating tons of different things. But there are also good clinics out there I've heard of that are aware of how brain injuries can heal. And so if you can find somebody that understands your symptoms, knows what you're going through, whether it be a support person or a provider, I would find those people as quickly as you can.
Thank you for saying that. I think too, there's a brain injury association or brain injury alliance in every state, right?
Oh yeah, they're a great resource.
Yeah, so you can look that up too, find your local one. And they probably have support groups and information and things like that. So yeah, resources are good.
Yeah, the Brain Injury Association. I mean, the one for Utah is pretty good. I know that they have a national one too. And so there's lots of resources out there if you do a little bit of digging.
Awesome. Now, if you are the support person, tell me what you've learned, whether from the people who were supporting you or as working at CFX and seeing lots of people who are supporting their loved ones. What advice would you have for them?
Oh, that's a harder one. I mean, going through an injury myself, I thought I would know what it'd be like to be a support person. I mean, my wife has even done some treatment as well. And I think the biggest thing is just acknowledging that when they're going through a hard time, when they're behaving poorly, first off, just give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, it's hard enough to deal with an injury, let alone to be vulnerable enough to admit that you're struggling with symptoms of brain injury, whether they acknowledge it's a brain injury or not. So being able to provide that validation and support, like, yeah, you are struggling with something and this looks really hard. I'm so sorry. Being able to be that person that isn't saying they're crazy and then it's all in their head, that's usually the first step towards healing and being able to feel validated. Like, yeah, I'm not crazy. No, I'm dealing with something that's really hard. So I think that's the first step, is just validation and just being that listening ear. And then the next step is just kind of finding resources or helping find them resources within the level of their comfort zone. Some people are ready and are gung-ho and other people aren't, but being able to kind of have that balancing act to be able to have those conversations of, do you want to change this? Are you willing to try something out? And if you can have those frank and open conversations about trying to find something to help improve their situation, I would say most people are willing to try and change things and try something out like treatment.
Yeah, I think one of the things that tends to come up, and I guess this is more for the person struggling with the brain injury, but I know that people talk about feeling pressure, and maybe they're putting it on themselves, but they feel like they're responsible for other people's emotions concerning them. Like if they're having a hard time, they feel bad about it, or they feel guilty because the other person's going to be disappointed that they can't do something that day or whatever. And so I like to remind people, you're not responsible for anybody else's reaction to your injury. Like you have enough to deal with yourself. Like don't put that on you as well. And then maybe as the support person, kind of exactly what you said, just letting them know and reminding them, you're not your injury. Like, I know your symptoms don't define you. It's kind of, that messaging might be helpful. And
I agree. Yeah, wholeheartedly. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, when they've had an injury and symptoms for long enough, they eventually will feel like that's who they are. But being able to just see the good in them and see, hey, there is still good to you. You're not all bad. Being able to point those things out can be a really big game changer. At least that's what it was for me. My wife was somebody that was always like, hey, I see you're struggling with these things, but I also know there's a lot of good in you. And there's all these things you can do. Let's focus on the good, right? But at some point, if it gets difficult enough, I mean, like being able to trust yourself to go see a professional like a psychotherapist, or meet with a psychiatrist or neurologist who is familiar with brain injury and is up to date, they can be important players in being able to at least help you get some answers for factors that are influencing how you're feeling, even provide some band-aids, right? So like medication or something like that. Not all medications are good and they're not for everyone. And I'm no doctor, so I can't say everything, but I can say that sometimes having a band-aid to at least get you in a place to where you can go get additional help from a treatment like cognitive effects, I feel like that sometimes is a safe step, and that can be a part of your healing journey. And there shouldn't be any shame in that.
Yes, amen to that. Thank you. So do you feel like there's anything lingering from the injury? Are there any things that you're still dealing with on a regular or not even regular basis?
Yeah, I mean, I did get COVID during the crazy years of COVID in November of 2020, and that put me back a little bit. Like some of my symptoms reemerged, but I feel like those have been mostly going away. But my vision, again, that's something that I haven't been able to get around to. And vision can be a very difficult thing to do if you don't have a professional to work with you on it. So I still have some things that I want to work on, but I'm able to do so much more than I could have otherwise, that I'm really happy with where I'm at. And one day when I'm not in the poor college student life, I might be able to go do some vision therapy.
Awesome. Okay, so just a couple more questions here. Tell me, if you haven't already addressed this, what lessons have you learned from this experience? Anything overall that you'd like to touch on?
I would say one of the most important lessons I've learned is that there is far more to a person than what you get from one or multiple interactions. And some people can behave very well or very poorly. And usually there's a lot more going on with that person than you'll ever know unless they tell you everything, right? And Usually that's only if you're a family member or a very close friend. And so being able to give people a little bit of grace, I mean, doesn't mean that you're condoning all their behavior, especially if it's poor behavior, but not to just be super quick to judge somebody based off of an interaction you have with them. And I think that's been probably the biggest thing that has changed how I view other people. And I found that most people they have good intentions and they have good desires, but sometimes we have these struggles that make it really hard for us to do and be the people we want to be. And then beyond that, just an appreciation for how much the brain is involved in everything. I mean, I've learned how much, like, if I get really stressed and my gut is affected and they're like intertwined, right? And so like there are so many things that's going on with the brain that it's this exciting new frontier of science that, like, if you see something is off in your body or there's these factors that don't seem to line up really well, always double check on the brain to see if there's stuff going on there too.
Yes, right? So good. What recommendations would you have, or what would you say is the most helpful things that people can do at home prior, if they're wanting to come to CFX sometime, that would be great. But if they're not there right now, what kinds of things would you recommend that they do to help in the meantime?
Great question. I mean, cognitive effects is one example of a brain injury treatment clinic among many that are great out there. In terms of trying to find a way to do things at home, I highly recommend trying to find little ways to get involved in your life again, and understand that when symptoms are coming on, part of that is just a threat signal that your brain is trying to tell you what you're doing, your brain doesn't feel safe with, right? And if you can push the envelope just a little, but then make sure you're incorporating rest as you need throughout the day, I'd recommend trying to get back involved in your life if you can. Even if it means like doing things like putting on sunglasses and a hat and some noise canceling headphones. Even if that's what you need to get out of your house for the first time, do that. Get moving, get out. Our brain needs movement. Our brain needs to be thinking in order to actually heal and to make progress. So if you're somebody that's dealing with symptoms, just find one step that you're like, okay, I don't feel comfortable going outside, but maybe I can move around my house a little bit more. Start with that. Or maybe I could do a quick phone call with somebody I care about, or I could do something that's meaningful to me, like just getting outside and just sitting on your porch. Anything you can do to get a little more active and involved in your life is the first step towards being able to feel better and feel like you actually can control your situation rather than be a victim to it.
Beautiful. Thank you. That sounds very OT. Occupational therapists love helping people get into their daily lives and like what's meaningful to them. So that was perfect answer. Well done.
Awesome. I passed the test.
You did. So last question here. What has helped you to maintain hope through this process for you, and or how do you see hope playing into people who are coming through CFX and our patients there?
Well, I think being able to witness it myself, I think that's seeing people get their own hope back. I've witnessed it for 5 years. I mean, I can confidently say I've worked with thousands of brain injury patients now coming through this clinic. I mean, I saw people who started treatment who had already been on this path of healing versus people who are starting it for the very first time. And the brain is capable of change. I mean, you know that saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I mean, that's been disproven, right? But the fact that if you can listen to this podcast and remember something later, your brain is undergoing neuroplasticity, which is the vehicle through how your brain heals too, right? So the fact that you are still able to get out and do something or learn or remember something, your brain is capable of that change. You're capable of improving your situation or changing it for the better. That right there, I feel like, is a beacon of hope for anybody that feels they're stuck, that no matter how stuck you feel, no matter how tight situations may be, there is always something small you can do to make this situation better. Whether it's, like I suggested, moving around a little bit, or if you're up to that motivation to where you're going to go out and you're going to go get treatment, I feel like there's always something out there. Even if it requires some digging, you can eventually find a solution that can help improve your life. Whether it's getting back to 100% or even just getting 20% back of what you used to. There's always a way that you can find something to make life better and more enjoyable, or at least not hurt so much.
Beautiful. Thank you. And as you were saying that, it reminded me of the books that I know CFX recommends people read. I don't know if you've read them or not. The Norman Doidge's books, The Brain's Way, The Brain That Changes Itself.
Those are crazy stories, but those are really good examples of like people in terrible situations that can see their brain change.
And yeah, that gives so much hope. I just remember I would listen to it on the drive home from work, and I'd like bust into the house and be like, the brain is amazing. Everybody has to read this book. They're very hope-filling, because the brain really can change, and just knowing that you're not stuck forever is very hope-filling. So
yeah, I agree. That is a very good book to read. I've gotten through half of it, and just being able to read those first 2 chapters, I was just like, this is incredible.
It's so exciting. Brain is really, really amazing. Awesome. Anything else that you want people to know about anything about you, about concussions, anything else that you want to make sure is said before we end here?
Well, I've been working in brain injury treatment for 5 years, and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface. And it is overwhelming to think about everything that there is to learn, but it's so fun to learn about, and there's so much to be had. And so instead of being intimidated by like, oh, I don't know anything, I still feel like I know nothing, and I've been doing this for 5 years. I recommend just keep learning, just have fun with it, just see what your brain is doing for you as a service, and you can just come to appreciate how awesome you are and how much you're actually doing, though you feel like it's not very much.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much again for being on here today with us and sharing your insights and wisdom and experience here. This is awesome and really helpful.
Of course. It has been a pleasure to be on here. And Bethany, it's always such a treat to be able to talk to you. You're such a happy one. You just light up the room wherever you're at. I think you're so great, and I hope this continues to go well.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Nate. You're so awesome. I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.